Well, I would like to actually start by thanking you, Luis and Nieves and Diego and Javier, the curators, for the for inviting me to this conversation, but also for creating a different context of extended conversation, because further than this this event today or this encounter today, we've been having some previous conversations and exchanging texts with Cristina and with them, and it has been a very interesting context to be in, very nourishing. So thank you. And well, the proposal was for me to be the theoretical counterpart of this conversation. And so what I'm proposing is a theoretical framework that it's, I hope you take as a very tentative, non-definitive, and to be constructed with Cristina and with you all, hopefully. And more than a theoretical framework, I hope it works like as a glossary or a set of tools or a relational arena than a framework. And it's what I'm calling the Holobion city. Well, a little disclaimer first. I'm with 3 screens, so I may have a bit of a mechanic act. So yeah, here's the disclaimer. So I will start to share the screen. Let me see if I can. Yeah, can you see it properly? Full screen? Yeah, okay.
That's perfect.
So as I said, I'm calling this this glossary, Holobion city. And first, a brief note on what Luis was saying, that this proposal expands from the chapter The Multi-Species City, which I contributed to the book Resilient City, published by ACAL. It was in June this year. And it was a rapid response and choral response to the COVID-19 pandemics. So I will refer to some ideas drafted there. But also, Holobion City is a catalyzation of my curatorial practice at IMNA, and in relation to some of the rewildering and naturation processes of experimentation that are being carried out in Madrid, in which we are participating. And lastly, a side note to say that some of the images that and references that you will see today are part of a video essay that we are creating in IMNA with the homonymous name, the Holobion City, in which we include interviews to some of the scientists that I will name today, such as Scott Gilbert, or architects, policymakers, doctors, and artists, whom participated or whom are participated in this project and are helping us to draft this idea of the Holobion city. So giving you a little bit of context in my curatorial practice at IMNA, as Luis introduced, I'm currently working at the Mutant Institute, which is the artistic laboratory for climate action of the Center of Contemporary Creation, Matadero, Madrid. And it promotes, we promote and support projects at the intersection between art, fiction, science, technology, or strategies of collective intelligence. But the particularity of IMNA is that it was founded it was a cross-institutional initiative. It was founded not just by Matadero, but also by the environmental area of the Madrid City Council and the Innovation and Technology for Development Center of the university, of the UPM. So together with these other institutions and agents, we are promoting in Madrid the program Demonstrations of Clean and Healthy Cities, which is a program by the Knowledge Innovation Communities for Climate, or Climate KIC, of the European Institute of Innovation and Technology, the EIT. And the deep demonstration aims to support 15 European cities to reach the climate neutrality by 2030. So this is important for me to outline now, because in connection with the conversation that we will have with Cristina later, because we are working towards a very specific goal and time frame. No? So within this framework, what we are proposing from Madrid is the creation of multi-stakeholder and collaborative work model to develop a portfolio of interconnected projects. One of the areas of the experimentation is dedicated to the design and development of nature-based solutions, and with the connection of urban naturation and health. And in Matadero, we are working together with Eli, the Oficina de Arquitectura, and artists such as UH 513, the ones that you see in this image, or Canteljan, towards the design and implementation of a cyborg garden that may help us adapt to climate change. And also, apart from this, we have launched some projects as the ones that I that I introduced, the video essay I was referring, to reflect on the narratives that such processes of urban naturation and nature-based solutions imply, or the narratives that they construct, no? And it is here in the rethinking of this concept of nature-based solutions, a concept that no doubt a public like you is familiar with. It is here in NBS and in the relation with of naturation and our health, where our journey towards rethinking theoretical frameworks for architectural practices begins. No? So to begin with, I would like to make a very brief note on the roots of the division between nature and human culture, or the idea that despite the evident impact of our species on the planetary ecosystem, in speaking of nature, we continue to exclude human beings as a superior or exceptional entity. But if we pay attention to other animal architectural forms, we realize that in general lines, they are not so different from us. No? All animal architecture responds to the need for shelter and that of the survival of their offspring. They modify the immediate world for the benefit of the species and increase the predictability and order of the habitat. So there is always certain amount of segregation from other species. So ours in principle, it's perhaps not so different. The question is what notion of benefit in terms of health has predominated in the design of our cities and our progression separation from nature and the annihilation of other species during our short history on the planet. No? So to think of this notion of benefit in terms of health, I would like us to look into the history of biology and evolutionary theory, and how some of the principles established there have contributed to the notion of human exceptionalism and to build habitats such as cities. Defined as the ability of living beings to adapt to disturbing agents, or adverse situations, the idea of evolutions or resilience of species has traditionally been associated with that of the natural selection. So the law of the strongest, or the Darwinian theory of evolution, which have largely contributed to our settlement in the world through a logics of competition and the association of nature with everything beyond the limits of human society and culture. But recent revisions of that theory, like the one that I'm putting here by biologist Lynn Margulis, one of the leading biologists of our times, put forward the logics of cooperation as something fundamental and in adaptation processes. So this segregation of nature and culture has been translated in a very direct way in the modern urban planning of our Western cities, especially after epidemics such as the Black Death between the 14th and 18th centuries, and then from the 19th century. The history of urban planning must be understood partly in parallel with a hygienist trend. No? From a hygienic point of view, and also I take the opportunity to connect this argument with the one put forward by Lydia Kalipoliti in the past session. For those of you who didn't see the session, she was talking about the hidden infrastructures of excrements. So from a hygienic point of view, sanitation, or the general state of public health and the control of pandemics in cities, were considered in terms of cleaning or eliminating the dirt. No? Much of these basic networks and infrastructures were designed to isolate the human species from possible infectious agents from other species. everything considered nature or non-human nature was progressively left out of urban centers, led by this idea or this notion of or this prevention criteria based on the fear of contagion from other species. So during the last century, this fear, what I argue is that has taken hold in urban communities, giving rise to many of the biophobias or fear of non-human living beings that are still present at a social and administrative level in urban planning of our cities. So these biophobic tendencies of hygienic origin are key factors to understanding the progressive destruction of our biodiversity. So to the point that in 2015, the philosopher Timothy Morton coined this behavior or claimed the need to give a name to this behavior as ecopath, someone indifferent or positively stimulated by the suffering of non-human beings. No? But so there have been many responses to such tendencies and to speciesism that advocate for the recognition of the rights of non-human subjectivities and other entities. But beyond qualifying our behavior with respect to the other species from an ethical point of view, I think what is important to understand now in the situation we're in right now is that the way we relate to the rest of the inhabitants of the planet translates into the destruction of the optimal environment for the proper functioning of the species that give us life. So what I argue is that making the case, again, this rationale, this traditional rationale of competition in terms of health may be helpful in what we're doing today, which is rethinking architectural practices in the light of a health and environmental emergency. And here is where I think that the figure of the holobiont may be useful. So holobionts are entities formed by association of different species, host and many other species living in or around it. And the terms derive from the ancient Greek, holos, which means all, and bios, which means organism or living being. So it's a whole living beings. It is commonly used to refer to the association between macroorganisms like animals or plants, and to its symbiotic microorganisms that make the microbiota. No? For those of you who are not familiar with this, term, I'll just give you a very brief genealogy. I think it's interesting to go to the genealogy because actually the term was invented at least 4 times. So the thing is, that was since 1943, it was invented and then forgotten, and invented and then forgotten. And as Professor Scott Gilbert, whom I mentioned at the beginning, it's one of the participants of this video show we're producing, and he's an immunologist, as he notes, this points to the necessity of this kind of term and the non-inclusion of this term in the mainstream imaginary and narratives. So it was created by physiologist Harold Meyer Abeck in 1943, then by Lynn Margulis, Richard Jefferson then in 1994 referred to the holobiont, linking it to agriculture, and then Ileana Rosenberg and Eugene Rosenberg relating it to corals, and finally Scott Gilbert from the 2009 onwards relating it to immunology and our health. So from this, from all this, we will focus very briefly on 3 definitions. The one or 3 researches on this term. The one by Lynn Margulis, who is the main revisionist of evolutionary theory of adaptation by competition, and through her lifelong work, she pointed out to the leading role given to symbiotic processes, introducing the possibility of understanding the cooperative paradigm as a great capacity for adaptation, and as having an important role in our evolution. So the law of the strongest is thus, with this revision of Margulis, complemented with the law of the cooperating species, with organisms interacting together to form multi-species individuals. Then Iliana Rosenberg and Eugene Rosenberg, as I say, related to corals, saying that you can't identify a coral as a single genome organism, that you have to always speak about the coral and its symbiotic algae. And that's why basically we find corals just in patches of sea that have light, because this algae can do the photosynthesis, and so the coral lives. Without this collaboration, it's impossible that the coral lives. And then Professor Scott Gilbert, finally, from the point of view of immunology, proposes that we have evolved to use bacteria in order to become who we are. And so if the narrative of the individual, the competitive paradigm, and the division between nature and culture as an evolutionary consequences have led to an extreme segregation and extermination of other species, this view has also made us forget that our bodies are made up of many more non-human cells than human, that we have evolved and we live thanks to the cooperations of tiny species that need a certain environment and nutrients to live, and that this environment maintains an optimal balance in relation to its biodiversity and coexistence between species. So as our immune systems continues to evolve, one of the questions about the holobionts and human health is if we evolve to expert certain bacteria to help our bodies when we form cities and we get away from nature, have we lost bacteria that we actually need? No? In the light of environmental and health emergencies of our time, what Holobiont City proposes is an arena from where to rethink our practices from a multi-species entanglements, more than human politics, and the logics of cooperation, as an essential perspective in the reformulation of our cities. So the figure of the Holobiont, I hope that you take it as a literary catalyst to articulate more relational descriptions of the tentacular terrains of the city and its communities from the perspective of health. So we know that by 2050, 80% of the world's population will be urban, that human settlements already exceed the capacity of planetary resources, and that this increasing urbanization puts even more pressure in the resource systems and infrastructures of the city. So hence we must consider cities as fundamental environments to transform, and architects as key actors in such transformations. But for me, the question is, might this narrative of the Holobiont play a role in the making of cities and the practices of environmental architecture? So going back to the beginning of my presentation regarding policy making and nature-based solutions, in Europe, this consideration is translated into policy making and urban greening and rewildering endeavors. And much of these initiatives propose the deployment of nature-based solutions under the assumption that, or at least in some cases, that nature is understood as something other and external to the human being that can help us provide solutions through the use of intelligently designed services. And what I argue is that many of such proposals branch from an understanding of our cities that is heir to the smart city model, or that which trusted technology to provide solutions to city problems. So responding to such approach, Holobiont City proposes to establish denser and more heterogeneous descriptions of the design of our cities and agents transforming them. And it spans from the conviction that the symbiotic and cooperative model of the Holobiont has the potential to contribute to a defrontalization between nature and human culture in the making of our cities and approach from the health perspective. An important argument of the Holobiont City is that the integration of microorganisms in the design of our cities, because given that microorganisms have dominated and shaped our planet for 3.5 billion years, and that they account for the largest reservoir of biodiversity, of genetic biodiversity in cities, that we should include them in urbanism. So in this sense, in our way to biodiverse cities, it is crucial to understand the role played by technology. This is why what people like Miguel Pérez and Regina Flores from the MIT started doing in 2016, and in this project that you see in the screens. And basically what they argue, what Miguel Pérez argues, is that technological projects focus on the large scales, such as satellites, have directed our urban perception towards macro levels. So with navigation tools like Google Maps. And in addition, the introduction of big data and all kinds of sensors in cities under the logic of the smart city have made our senses modulate at a meso level, expanding our receptors on a human scale. So both macro and meso offer a level of scalability that provides a platform for decision making for agents of public administration, urban planners, or civic groups, no? But that has not happened at a micro level. But what I want you to note from this, and further than getting into the thrilling world of microorganism, and also transitioning through Cristina's presentation, is that what this highlights is this lack of consideration for microorganisms in cities points to something important, that in a society dominated by a relationship of consumption and exploitation with the environment, the optically visible shapes our experiences in the city, and we forget that there are invisible systems that direct our interactions with the environment. So, for example, one of the most relevant layers of invisible information is associated with pollution, with air, water, or soil. Like in the image you see, which is a project we did at IMNA with artist Robertina Shevianich and many others, to study the invisible layers of contamination in the Manzanares. No? So thinking of microorganisms, the invisible layers of rivers, or even about excrement infrastructures, as Gallipoli did in the past session, highlights the importance of making visible the negatives of architecture, or what is outside the typical floor plans, elevation, and traditional architectural landscapes. All that is not built or that it's not visible to the citizens' eyes. So what microorganisms and excrement suggest is that it is essential to shape our perception and make visible the different scales that make up the invisible urban systems, as well as their interconnection, to understand that cities are the result of massive collaborations of humans and non-human agents. So with that note, and from this glossary of terms, of ideas on climate change, the city, our health, and environmental architecture practices, I give the floor to Cristina, who will no doubt land all this into the realms of social interaction and the new political and economical models for emerging paradigms, such as the one proposed by LACOL. And so my question for Cristina would be, what are the invisible ecodependence and interdependent systems that surface in your processes of participation that we can discuss later? Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. So I will share the screen. Sorry. Oops. Now, do you see it well? Well, so thank you for your inspiring presentation. Also, it was a pleasure to think and to read these different chapters and articles. And it was important for us also to realize that probably in our process of work, in our kind of participatory process, there is many voices and approaches that we are leaving left. And I think it's something that we have to manage and to, in a way, work in that direction. So I also wanted to thank also like all the organizers, Diego, Luis, Germán, all for inviting us to be here. It's really challenging also, and in a way like just articulate our work also with this theoretical and narratives. So just a kind of a really brief introduction. We start our relation with the territory as a student. So basically as a collective organization and a critical approach as a students, we get involved in the area of science in Barcelona, specifically through the case study of Can Batlló, an area under transformation, a space that it was as a struggle for the neighborhood for almost 30 years. And through this academic work, we get involved in the neighborhood, we get involved in the different platforms and different existing projects and organizations and networks, which allows us to know and to be more familiar with the cooperative movement, which is essential, and it's the heritage of the workers and popular history of this industrial area. And was precisely when we arrived to the neighborhood in 2009 that researchers, also different spheres from social movement, were in a way creating alternative narratives in a moment of crisis, a social, economical, political crisis, and in a moment where the welfare state was being dismantled. The cooperative neighborhood as a proposal of a collective organization to solve the different needs and services that the society, the people may have. So was this connection from this empty area of Can Batlló, kind of this space of opportunity related to this narrative and this kind of utopic in certain moment ideas of a cooperative neighborhood, where the power of the society itself. So in that sense, like after many years claiming for the reuse to the entrance and the reoccupation of the area to the city, like to reappropriate the reappropriation of the area for the neighborhood, that the platform of Can Batlló started in a way that restored all the different spaces. And for us, it was just after like finishing our studies, in a way, it was a way to unlearn and to learn. So it was Can Batlló and the relation with the neighborhood. It was essential for us to understand the agency of architecture, to understand what a collective process of transformation may include from the different perspectives, skills, resources, time. And in that sense, it was a matter of new protocols of provision of architecture. And this was essential for us in order to understand what, as architects, which methodologies and which are the effects of these different processes, understanding also the involvement and the possibility of the further social interaction. And I think that for us, this introduction, because in a way, the history of Can Batlló, the history of this space has been in parallel to the trajectory of LACOL. And I think that without this involvement, we probably wouldn't be a cooperative of architects. So in that sense, the different values are related to the cooperative movement based on the co-responsibility, the relation with the territory, a feminist and ecology perspective. Also this idea of equality and the intercooperation, understanding our role in relation with other agents was essential and was the reason through this idea of an horizontal structure and democratic structure of work that based our decision and our articulation as a collective through a cooperative. And we call it LACOL as a kind of infrastructure of production because it dignifies our work. And I think it's also interesting to think that the way that we work and the conditions of labor are also essential to understand also which kind of architecture, which are the main ideas and the collaborations that we foster. And it's also because there is the thing that the perpetuation of certain hierarchies and structures of power related to the profession was something that we had also to, in a way, dismantle and reformulate. And I think it's also interesting, also this relation between the outcomes, but also what it's even what is behind. So I will center in a way the work and the rest of the intervention in relation with this idea of infrastructures for sustainable living, understanding this infrastructure as a community devices, as a community facilities, equipments in different scales and programs, which in a way and for our understandings, which are looking is the kind of the sustainability of life in the broadest way possible, economical, social, political, environmental. And because in that sense, and linked to the first space that where we were engaged also as part of Camballo, which was Coopolis, it was basically an incubator of social and solidarity economy. And in that sense, it was a kind of a counterbalance in that in one side of the city we had Barcelona Activa and this incubator of economies related to the global system, technologies and IT, and in the other sense we wanted to introduce how social and solidarity economy it's the motor, it's the core, the base of these transformations that we are in a way promoting, because basically as we had the capitalistic model and the neoliberal policies were basically having the center the profit, the accumulation and the exploitation of resources without changing the economical system, probably it was much difficult to have a really systemic change that also produce a health environment, a health ecosystem. And basically, in that sense, we get involved in the management of this space, in the sense that which is the role of the architect when you are promoting social and solidarity economy, but we had also the opportunity to restore as a kind of temporary space using in the meanwhile that the Camballo was restored for the public administration, and basically was through strategic changes in the roof and developing modules with the material that we had on these industrial premises, and also as this space was growing, developing with and with the cooperation with the carpentry that it's also in these premises, spaces what basically are trying to reduce the energy consumption, just kind of differentiating which spaces needs a higher level of comfort, which spaces need a less level of comfort, how we can in a way also dismantle and in a way, after the lifespan of this space, moved all these materials to another place, or almost all these materials to another place. And it's a shame because I don't have images these spaces like in life, which I think it would be much better. But basically, this is spaces was also, it's important to see how new initiatives are emerging, but also this idea of interconnecting different perspectives, because there are many projects that work with migrant people, projects with eco-social transitions, and in that sense, like trying to, in a way, introduce a new narrative in a feminist, decolonial, environmental approach. And in one hand, this idea of new economies, also understand the economy of this idea of the management of the household, this idea of household in a really, in a broad understanding from the area itself, the neighborhood, these equipments, these community infrastructures, and also, of course, this idea of the domestic environment. So, understanding Camballo as a platform where individual needs were solved through collective answers, and in the middle of the economical crisis in around 2011, 2012, emerged the project of La Borda. So basically the idea of politicization of the domestic realm. And I think it's totally related with our culture and our heritage, and how the cities and the management and the politics around housing has been implemented since the dictatorship. So it's a cultural, and I think it's a massive change that has to be done. And basically, it was also related with a kind of society, with also in relation with the family and a certain strategies of speculation and economical activities on the city. And this idea that emerged from the housing responsible in the dictatorship, that we want a society of owners and a society of proletarians. So I think there is many many cultural aspects related to the housing. So basically, Laborda wanted to implement alternative regime of property. So looking for international case studies, basically we came with this idea of a cooperative housing that it's based mainly in the collective ownership, where the people have a contract of use. So basically, people has the right of use, has the right to decide as members of the cooperative, but the speculation is blocked. So it's a non-profit system which allows an affordable and stable homes. And this is a kind of model that needs to be spread as much as possible, because in Barcelona we have only the 2% of public housing, and the public institutions are not, they do not have the capacity to increase really to increase this housing stock, like this non-speculative housing stock. So from different perspectives, from different points, also from the community side, we have the obligation. So we have we are interpolated in this idea of provoking new models. So basically, Laborda was formulated with different the values and principles were around this idea of affordable and decent housing, like avoiding speculative. But I really want to focus on this idea of production, of developing new models of production, management, and ownership, produce new forms of coexistence. And also this idea of related to a surrounding, to a neighborhood, and make the most of the existing resources. So this idea of political model, a mode of coexistence, which also how the daily routines are transformative and are tools for more sustainable living, but also how the management of the housing, it's also crucial for the different strategies that we are going to propose. So basically, the cooperative housing projects are processes itself, so which took almost 6 years to be completed from the beginning until the start the conviviality. And I think it's interesting to understand this parallel process of the architectural definition. So it related to the legal and financial development, related to the different organizational models. The architecture has been a kind of a line which articulates also this idea of building housing to build community, because through the different workshops and the different discussions, we manage in a way to understand each individuals, the different needs, and create a collective identity. So, and this was talking about the model of conviviality, talking about the different, and how this is affecting the different programs of the collective housing through the environmental halls, so through different surveys and understanding of the individual needs of each of the members, etc., etc., etc. So each of the main decisions of the project were discussed collectively through the architectural committee, but also to the General Assembly. And in that sense, just basically this idea of the levels of participation that allows to define the infrastructure, and arriving to this, the architecture itself as a device, which in a way intersects this idea of the community behavior, this idea of the collective programs, this transition from the public to the private, in relation also with environmental performance. So basically a compact building with an interior courtyard that allows the cross ventilation, which has in the ground floor and the north areas the public programs, which needs a less level of comfort, and densifying the south facade. This is basically this how this is behaving in winter and in summer, and also this idea of introducing the vegetation inside. So also how the building touch the ground, how also we can in a way breathe the terrain and introduce humidity and vegetation, and how all the strategies are based through an active user that is going to control and manipulate this infrastructure. And so no technologies, is basically just routines, or mainly routines. So also this idea of challenging regulations, from the parking regulations to the standards and the comfort to the housing itself, developing an open infrastructure that is available through time and then can be adapted for the users. and how this is kind of a radiography of the result. And also as a cooperative, and also as technicians fostering new materials that are available to reduce the environmental impact, because I think that in a certain moment we reduced the energy consumption. I think it was also the moment to reduce the energy consumption during the construction. Now we are talking about the circular systems and the cycle of life, but it's also necessary to introduce the role of the users and the daily routines during the processes. Some images about this open infrastructure, these collective spaces, this conjunction through environmental devices and spaces of interaction. And and this idea of this different transition and different scales and spaces. And this idea of the self-responsibility in this daily basis. So this idea of also simulation and reality, the data and the management, and also how the role of the architect is continuing through time. So it's also our responsibility to understand how the building is behaving, and also giving the protocols and manuals of use of these infrastructures. And how this collective management are also allowing the implementation of new measures, actions and habits. That so this idea of architecture, that also instrumentality of the architecture in hands of the user, but bringing awareness and also the possibility to reduce the demand, the consumption. So this direct relation between our routines and environmental effects, making more and more visible. So visualizing all these conditions of life. And some people in Laborda says, we were in a way looking for a response to the social and climate change through Laborda, but it was not, we couldn't imagine this in a way, in form of a pandemic. So basically, nowadays in the Simon Prize, we collect and gathering some images from the confinement. So basically this idea that I will reduce so through these different spaces of interaction, and Laborda really became a device where co-responsibility, where discussion, where the different inequalities on abstract measures of confinement were discussed, were defined, with the contradictions, but probably defining a more sustainable months, years for all the users that were involved. Taking different measures, new protocols of care and solidarity and mutual support in the different spheres and difficult moments, taking in consideration also the more vulnerable people. And just to in a way, to kind of ending, I will dedicate the last 5-7 minutes, and I think I'm more or less on time, thinking how this, as a pioneer experience, were introduced in the housing plan. We also had the opportunity to work in the housing plan of Barcelona, and realizing that to increase the affordable housing until the 15%, it's need to incorporate and introduce as many devices, tools, and agents in the creation of infrastructures of housing. So basically, the cooperative housing was introduced, different actions were developed, and through these different competitions, we had the opportunity to develop kind of new variations with the same principles, and infrastructures that were based in participation of the users, in reconfiguration of the collective housing programs, and related to environmental sustainability. And in that sense, one of the plots were next to the high ring, like one of the rings in Barcelona. So basically we start saying probably here nobody should live, any school, any public space. But it was the plot, and basically the infrastructure was a response to that specific urban condition, working as a kind of a series of filters that in a way controls the air movements, and I think it's explained in section, which basically, but it's facing all the units to the south, to the green area, kind of a part that is just opposite the plot, trying to introduce different systems of depuration, of controlling of the earth. So as a kind of a machine where this air pollution and also the noise and discomfort of the site is going to be controlled and manipulated in order to generate a more healthy environment. Also following different typologies that probably adapt to a more diverse society, also as in the case of La Borda. The other plot was in Poblenou, also in a specific urban location, in one of the limits of the superillas, the superblocks strategy, but also in an axis of different public facilities. So basically the strategy was through the corridors and the outdoor spaces of the project, which we understood as also spaces of interaction, this transition from the public to these different courtyards, etc. Corridors. We allocated, we shift the position of these corridors just to adapt to the surrounding and also the environmental parameters, thinking in terms of the sun direction, the noise, etc., etc. So basically, again, this idea of infrastructures that are think from outside to the inside, but also locating the common areas, which normally are the most unprivileged zones, in the most privileged areas, in the center of the community, in the spaces of interaction. In that sense, basically also with views to all the surroundings, especially in the upper floors, like facing the old Poblenou. And this also this kind of wood structure that is totally symmetric and allows this different shift and different relations with the surrounding. And to end, also again in Can Batlló, so one plot in Can Batlló was delivered, and we win this competition where again this idea of this relation with the surrounding, where these passive strategies were crucial. So this democratization of the sun, and also how this different this infrastructure allows multiple compositions, and also so this idea to bringing to the building the diversity of the society again. And in that sense, we always work environmentals from the energy, from the water, from the materials, and from the waste in terms of the cycles of the building. But in a certain moment, a couple of months ago, we had the opportunity with environmental consultancy, with a cooperative of engineers, to think how these collective processes of transformation that we were involved from Can Batlló as a communitarian self-managed space, also in relation with policies through social economies, so housing, how we can generate new protocols of urban transformation, how we can scale this up. So basically, we are working in collaboration with the municipality of Barcelona, understanding the different compromises in terms of climate emergency declaration, the different the agendas and green deals, and all these goals that we have to face in the urban context, and combining with the community-led management of Can Batlló, with the citizen heritage, that is the protocol of the contract that they have to manage the place, in relation with social economy and post-COVID measures that the municipality are in a way taking in consideration. And basically, we are just starting, but I think it's interesting to see how we can scale. So it is idea of expanding the practices and in a way facing the current challenges of our society, of our urban environments. And this project is basically a kind of living lab, sandbox, a space where the urban transformation is based on sustainability, kind of hard sustainability, we call it, climate emergency and circular economy, also understanding how the process of transformation are producing economy itself, challenging existing protocols, legal frameworks, administrative and operational processes, and do it through the community involvement and through social economy. And which is most important is this idea of replicability. So the idea of this project is, can we, in a public, cooperative, communitarian collaboration, understand the transformation of our cities? And probably the idea is understanding all this, or in that sense, I think this kind of projects from the daily routines, from the user perspective, to the urban and a systemic way, in a way interrelates this level. So I think it's through the practice we are working in these interdependencies that, in that sense, Amanda, in a way, was asking to visualize. And well, this is just the end of the presentation, and I will leave the screen.
Amanda, please.
Cristina?
Let's go on. Perfect.
Yes, I just wanted to briefly comment because you've talked a lot about the agency and responsibility of architecture. And I think that it's a very interesting point, and also in relation to the idea of the expanding practice, no, or the new set of skills, approaches that may increase this agency of architecture, no. And I was one of the questions that I had for you when we started talking was that if you think that your practice that involve participatory processes, it's something that it's more related or has, yes, it has a strong relationship with radical cartography, or these practices of making visible things that are not visible, no, and highlighting the critical and speculative role of the architect, and you said something like that the architect makes the difference because of the implementation possibilities, no, that this is something that it's a strong coin, let's say, or something very important for the architectural practice. So I was just wondering, because I think that it is a very important part that you are able to implement these ideas, but also I think it's something important in terms of legitimacy, and that is something that it has always been there in a way, no, in architectural practice. So I was wondering if what are this new set of skills or approaches that you think that architecture has gained through this kind of practices like yours, or the projects that you presented?
Well, I think it was interesting when you, in a way, highlight this idea of the radical cartographers, and I was, in that sense, just thinking and connecting when I think here in the neighborhood there is Ivan Miró as a theorist and researcher from cooperativism, and I think it was him when, in a certain moment, he said that suddenly when LACOL get involved in different processes, the possibilities and the potential of how this materialization of these ideas totally changed, and at the same time for us it has been essential. So at least I think I talk from education in Barcelona in my university, so I think that in that sense it's important to understand that if we talk about architectural agency, architectural education, and the roles and the skills, these are completely different based on from where you are speaking. So in that sense, I think that we were having a kind of a canonical education where the practice and this structure, this idea of the powers and structures that I was mentioning was crucial, and it was not present, this interaction with social dimension. So in that sense, for us, has been essential to work by the hand of the different collaborators all the time. So in that sense, our work is a collective process. And I think that for us, it's the most important. And these protocols of negotiation from the user, the specific needs, the cultural frameworks, but also in relation with the funding structures, the limit of change, environmental consultancy, but also with these researchers and the social movements and this narrative. So in a way, I like it to recognize it. So in order also to understand that we are just a part of a chain, we are also recognizing that our work without the current structures and all this intercooperation has no sense. So in one hand, I think this idea of just listening and understanding the need of the collaboration, and that our knowledge is limited and our knowledge is crossed by a certain privilege, hierarchies, etc., that I think has to be in a way reestablished. So which I would think that for me, this idea of visibilization and how the deepest understanding of the architecture and the construction, in that sense that the design has an impact in terms of the social dynamics, has an impact in terms of sustainability, but in the broadest way possible. And just this idea of understanding the context, understanding the impacts of our practice by just sharing and listening other agents. So at the sense, I don't know if we have to learn much more skills or we have to know about many. So I think we have to work with by the side, etc. And
sorry, a small thing, just to point out, if anybody of the public would like to ask something, you can use the chat, or you can, I don't know, put this little hand on, and then I will, but I'll let you continue. Sorry, that's for the case.
No, I think that in relation with this question, which I think in a way it's around the agency of architecture, as I was also asking Amanda from her perspective, in a way to frame from which are the challenges, which are the roles, which from her perspective is the agency of architecture itself, and in that sense, which new parameters we have to take in consideration, how the architecture is to listen to this also micro level, and in that sense, I really would like that to, in a way, to have your opinion about that.
Yes, I believe I was I replied with some examples actually to that question, not because for about the parameters of design, or to include these different scales of microorganisms and technologies, and also you were asking about the domestic space, no? And so one of the works we are working with the Living Architecture Consortium and architect Rachel Armstrong, who are for instance, they are designing a modular bioreactor wall, which processes the waste that is produced at home. So what it aims is to change the building impacts, no? That are I think it's like 40% of the carbon footprint or something like that, which is more than transport. And so what they are trying to do is to apply these biotechnological insights to relate this to the processing powers of microbes. So the idea is to make these microbes visible, and so they can process the waste and in the household, no? And so is the idea that it's not just enough with going for the goal of zero net emissions, but that we need to do something with the waste. Also in the cyber garden that I presented there, and that we are working with Eli, the Oficina de Arquitectura, who are directing the project, and they are collaborating together with artist Orkantel Han. And they are taking a special attention to the microbial communities we live with, and what they say about our cities. What specifically they are working they are doing a work with the Istanbul Biennial, and they are analyzing the different microbial communities of areas of Istanbul to know what histories these communities tell about the cities. I don't know actually, because maybe there's someone from the team that I haven't identified. If you're here, please shout out. Maybe not. There's no one from Eli. Bueno. And also another example that I was putting is one that is this concept of the patchy diversity that I like very much by Menno Schultitzen, who is an ecologist we are working with as well. And his idea, I like it because, and in relation to agency, I think it's relevant, because what he says is that actually our cities are very biodiverse. The only thing is that this biodiversity is patchy, or it's there is this fragmented ecosystems, no, all through the city. And it's a biodiversity that it's in a micro level, that it would be related with insects or microbial communities. And so how the role of the architect could be, if the aim is to increase biodiversity, could be directed to promote this kind of practices in which the citizens have the agency to increase the biodiversity at homes, at their patches of biodiversity, no? So yeah, so it's I like as well this notion, because it's using like the lenses of abundance, no? Instead of saying that, yeah, we have devastated cities with no biodiversity. So I like that as well.
Thank you.
I find something really interesting is that listening to your presentations, actually, which are looking at the same entity from very different sides. But you can see that you have both a very similar conception of what a city is. So that phenomenon, which is really difficult to describe, but you both have shared somehow a vision, I think, of what the city is. You see it wholly as an ongoing process. You see it as an extremely complex entity which you cannot somehow control, or of course not design, no? But it's something which you have, maybe you have to use the verb to manage, or you can somehow swim inside and live with it, no? And I think that is nice. You understand the city as a non-hierarchical structure, no? Both of you, from a biological and from a social, political, architectural point of view, no? And I think that is really nice, because that is also what probably makes both your visions they let emerge more resilient models, no? I was amazed by these pictures of the COVID of March or April or whatever in La Borda, where people were really having fun, having possibilities to share, and they had a much more complex structure than many thousand, actually many million people who have spent really 3 months in a flat with really big problems of isolation and so on. So you are creating through this vision a much more complex structure, which is also much more resilient, and probably, and that would be somehow my question, is I think to change, let's say, a power-based, exploitation-based, capital-based model of the city for a community-based makes probably the city a better host for that holobeyond that Amanda was talking about, no? Is it also, so you environmental issues, but maybe Cristina, my question to you would be, can you specify, maybe even through some anecdotes, how your communities are more open to biodiversity? I'm sure they are. You could see the plants in the windows, which is an anecdote, but I'm sure they are, no? So probably they are much more dog friendly and so on, no? And to Amanda, no, it would be also, do you think communities make out of the city a better host, or are a better host to make this holobeyond, which is the city? So I don't know, however you want.
I can start. So basically, I think that in each community there is this, at the end, you are defining, I was mentioning this idea of a collective identity. And in each community, there is people that is more sensible to certain aspects and certain ideologies and certain ideas. So basically, I think that part of the community was also like this people, which also taking the gardening group, where they are in fact like really taking care of the different vegetables, but instead also like the different liquids and how they use it. They are really sensible and also to respect the different ecosystems. And it's interesting because we are also working in this, how do we introduce vegetation in the courtyard, also as a measure to increase the comfort in summer, but there is also the roof. And in the roof nowadays, it's a kind of a salvatic space, like non-control. And in that sense, we understood it as a space that it's in relation with the park of Camballo, and also in relation with Montjuic, which is a huge garden park, urban park in Barcelona. So in that sense, it was this continuity of spaces where the diversity can be present. And I think it's part of this diversity of the group that all these sensibilities are introduced. And I would say like that definitely the answer is yes. I think we have, as part of the discussion in these projects, the sustainability and this diversity. And for example, in La Palma, there were people related to as water engineers. And in that project, the recycling of the water, the depuration of the water has been crucial. It has been a way that I cannot live in a project where we cannot deal with this issue. And I think that the rain cycles also how with our climate we can work in terms of water using the shower, etc., etc. So, and this came basically based on the needs and the interest and motivation of the people. And I think it's also that the limits, in some of the cases we can push as architects, but in some of the cases the impact, the changes came because of recognize and visibilize these different identities as part of the project. And in that sense, I'm always thinking how to increase the impact of our actions. But I was also asking Amanda about that. So how the projects and the dynamics that we produce has an impact. And in relation with these sensibilities, I think we have a lot of work to do in a social and architectural level.
Yeah, so what I was going to say is that so I understand cities as all living beings, no? So always in construction, in the making. And so this means that there's a dispute for agency, no? One of the questions, because of course we need to try and have a polyphony of voices, no? that are making the cities. One of the questions that we were discussing with Cristina was precisely this, no? How to engage or something like it was more. Is it difficult to engage certain groups of peoples, no, through certain narratives? And for me, the question is not that if it's difficult to engage certain groups of people, but whether we prevent asymmetries from happening, no? Because when this there is something in the making, there's always this tendency to asymmetries, no? And so yeah. So I think that there is there's different narratives that we can use in depending on the context, no? And that we need to adapt depending on the context. Yeah, sorry, I lost the question. I think the original question.
Sorry, no, it was a kind of comment. Just to give, it was a reflection, including a question. If you think really communities or to change, let's say the market, the conventional market, which owes the city, to change it for a concept of communities which actually belong to the city, if that makes a better host for a more healthy holobiont. That would be
for sure. Yes.
If that,
yes, yes,
how
sure.
can that contribute to improve, let's say, diversity and biodiversity?
Yeah, for sure. And then so the idea would be how practices like the ones like Cristina's or LACOL can push these transitions, no? So the need for cooperation. I mean, cooperation is not it's not something that happens like let's cooperate, and it's not an easy thing. It's so thinking of the idea of the political of Chantal Mouffe is the census. It's very difficult processes sometimes, no? So I think it's in this sense, this kind of practices that try to bind together can be a huge help to for this goal, no? Yeah.
Maybe I just have one more question for both of you. So Cristina, as an architectural design professor, as many of us are, what do you think? You talked about the canonical way of teaching and educating architects. So give us maybe one tip, just not a full curriculum, but give us one tip on certain actions that we could take, it could happen in our class, in our studio, in order to change direction and let's say embrace all this way of thinking that we've been tackling during the lecture. Amanda, of course, you're invited to answer to this too.
Yeah. Well, I think that I have the opportunity right now to, in a way, to contrast, to compare, to combine the education in the School of Barcelona and the education in the EA, in a postgraduate program. And I think that in that sense, it's absolutely, it's kind of opposite. So in that sense, like in Barcelona, you are in a way defining the brief and the conditions. And I think that the teacher itself has a major role in order to introduce the different concepts that the students has to be. And I think this is extremely different in the education at the EA, where the discussion, the critical approach, the research and the theoretical approach is crossed with the design. And in that sense that bring the students the motivation and the skills to research and introduce specific and subjective points, for me is essential. And in that sense, probably I will, in a way, push for the community approach, for the social, etc., environmental. But for me, it's more the attitude, how we can share, promote, enhance kind of a critical kind of to entrance in safe zones. And in that sense, for me, it's is the attitude and this idea of redefining and to breaking the established frameworks, which is essential. And I will say that as a student or as a beginning, like at the beginning of our practice, I think Laborda, it was our first approach, and we were really young and innocent, and we started to apply for changes on the regulation and to take risk and to change the standards, etc., etc. And because of I think we didn't know like the conditions, administrative, etc., etc. So I think this innocence, I think it's essential, and this the energy has to be, in a way, it's a kind of exercise, it's a gymnastic, and if we don't in a way activate this attitude in the school, it will be difficult that the people who's starting the practice has this approach. So I think this is the way that I understand.
I would add to the attitude that I would add the perspectives, no, changing a little bit of the human perspective and perhaps noticing more other kind of landscapes that can be changed or that can what Niels Bouden calls co-species landscapes, no, focusing on codependence of life forms, or the coexistence of alternative concepts of landscapes. So to the attitude thing, which I agree, I would have the perspective, no, shifting the perspective.